He was a wounded officer, bleeding into the snow after a ruthless ambush. His breath nearly gone as a strange German shepherd pressed against him, refusing to let the cold steal the last traces of life. No backup, no radio signal, no hope. Not until an 8-year-old boy fought his way through the blizzard, searching for the dog, and found the officer instead. What that child did next astonished even the federal agents who would later investigate the case. With trembling hands and a rescue watch far too big for his wrist, the boy worked side by side with the dog to pull the unconscious officer from the wreck, seal his wound with melting pine resin. And when the criminals closed in, that boy became the only light left in a world carved from ice and danger. If you believe courage and loyalty still hold their worth in this world, you are warmly invited to walk with us here at Healing with Max. How does this moment touch your heart? Wishing you a gentle, hope-filled day, no matter what storms may rise. The storm had swallowed the northern ridge long before morning arrived, dragging its heavy white curtain across Montana's spine until every field, every roof, every forgotten trail lay pinned beneath a weight colder than fear itself. In Aspen Hollow, the world had shrunk to the distance of a single breath. Chimneys exhaled helpless wisps of smoke that were torn away before they could rise, and the pines lining the valley bent low under sheets of ice that snapped and hissed each time the wind shifted. On days like this, even the bravest stayed home. Storms of this kind didn't ask permission. They simply took. But there, barely visible beneath the swirling snow, was a shape curled on the ground, half buried and nearly claimed by the night. A man lay face down beside a collapsed patrol vehicle, his uniform stiffened with ice, his shoulder dark with frozen blood. His breaths came shallow, 2 seconds apart, each weaker than the one before, and pressed tight against his ribs, shielding him from the wind as if guarding the last flicker of a dying ember, was a German shepherd the officer had never seen before. Max's fur bristled under the cutting wind. Frost clung to his snout like white ash, and his amber eyes, raw with instinct, never once left the fallen man. No backup, no radio signal, no hope. Only a dog determined to stand between his stranger and death itself, refusing the storm its prize. Far away, on the other side of the valley, a small cabin door slammed open against the wind. An 8-year-old boy stepped out, boots sinking instantly into the rising snow. Samuel Cole, slim, pale from winter, his left arm tucked deep inside an oversized jacket, while his right sleeve hung empty above a wooden prosthetic. The boy lowered his chin, breathing through his scarf, eyes tracking the storm like someone who had learned to listen to things adults forgot to hear. On his wrist hung his father's rescue watch, too big, too scratched, too worn, and ticking with the stubbornness of something that refused to die. Samuel pushed out into the storm with Max at his side, their small shapes swallowed almost instantly by the white fury tearing across the valley. They weren't wandering. They weren't chasing danger. They were searching for Raymond, his father, who should have returned from patrol hours ago. Max paused every few steps, nose lifted, reading scents Samuel couldn't see, and the boy followed, driven by the quiet, terrified certainty that something had gone terribly wrong, but the storm led them somewhere else entirely. The snow deepened as he descended the ridge, rising almost to his waist. Branches groaned overhead, dropping clumps of ice that startled the silence with dull thuds. Samuel kept one hand on the leather strap across his chest, the other resting against the smooth wood of his prosthetic limb. Every few steps, the watch's cold metal face tapped against his wrist, a rhythm that reminded him to breathe, to move, to not let fear take the lead. Then, faintly, Almost like a cry swallowed by the wind, the storm shifted. Max's bark cracked through the whiteout, sharp, urgent, and close enough to raise the hairs on Samuel's neck. The boy stumbled faster, pushing through drifts until the bark guided him to the fallen tree line, where shapes emerged from the blizzard in jagged, broken silhouettes. And then he saw it. A patrol SUV skewed against a pine trunk, metal twisted, windshield shattered, smoke curling weakly from beneath the hood before freezing mid-air. Max circled the wreck, pawing at the snow with frantic precision, his body angled protectively toward something on the ground, something that didn't move. Samuel's breath hitched. As he drew closer, the storm parted just enough to reveal the outline of a man lying on his side, half buried in frost. Tall, broad-shouldered, dark hair matted with snow. His uniform was torn open at the shoulder where blood, thick and nearly black, had stiffened the fabric. The nameplate still clung to his chest. Ward. Samuel dropped to his knees beside him. Ethan Ward's skin was chalk pale, lips edged in blue, his pulse flickering faintly beneath the boy's trembling fingers. This wasn't an ordinary accident. The wound was too clean, too close range, too deliberate. And in that instant, staring at the pattern of the injury, the angle, the burn marks, Samuel realized something that twisted the storm inside his chest. Someone had tried to execute this officer and leave him to die where no one would ever find him. Max pressed his head under the man's arm, as if trying to lift him, as if begging the boy to do something, anything. Samuel wiped snow from his face with the back of his sleeve, fighting the tremor in his breath. The wind roared, bending the trees above them until branches screamed in protest. He knew he didn't have long. He knew the cold could win at any second. But he also knew the storm had led him here for a reason. He braced his wooden arm under Ethan's back and hooked his left hand beneath the officer's collar. Max grabbed the fabric of Ethan's vest gently between his teeth. Together, one child and one dog, they began to drag the unconscious man away from the wreckage, inch by inch, across the ice-crusted snow. Every pull burned Samuel's muscles. Every shift of the officer's weight sent pain up his spine. The watch bounced against his wrist, its scratched glass catching stray shards of firelight reflected from the wreck. Samuel shifted Ethan's arm, rolled him slightly, and felt the sagging warmth beneath the torn shoulder. He needed to stop the bleeding. He needed heat. He needed something beyond courage. Samuel scanned the ground until he spotted the broken trunk of a pine, split open by the crash. Resin seeped slowly from the wound of the tree, thick and amber under the frost. Raymond had taught him this, the same father who had once worn the watch on Samuel's wrist. Heated resin sealed wounds, bought time, saved lives. The boy scooped a handful of resin into a metal cap he found wedged beneath the snow. With numb fingers, he flicked his father's old watch open, using the curved edge of the signal mirror to reflect a spark onto a strip of bark. After 2 failed attempts, a small flame caught, weak but alive, trembling like a newborn heartbeat in the storm. Snow hissed as he held the bark beneath the resin until it melted into a sticky gold. Then, with more care than most adults possessed, Samuel pressed the warm resin over the bullet wound, watching it harden, slow the bleeding, and return a hint of color to the officer's face. Max leaned closer, almost protectively hovering over both of them. For the first time, Samuel spoke, not aloud, but inside the quiet place where fear and bravery met. "Please hold on." The wind howled through the valley again, violent enough to erase tracks already fading in the snow. And just as Samuel lifted his head, just as he felt a faint tremor through the ground. He understood something with a clarity far older than his years. They weren't alone. The woods had gone too still, too careful, too aware. Somewhere beyond the swirling white, something or someone was closing in on them. Samuel tightened his grip on Ethan's jacket. Max growled, teeth bared toward the darkness. And in that frozen moment, where the world shrank to a dying man, a loyal dog, and a child too brave for his age, the storm held its breath, as if waiting to see what the boy would dare to do next. The ground trembled again, faint but certain, as if the forest itself exhaled under the weight of approaching danger. And Samuel felt the vibration run through Ethan's jacket before he registered the sound. Max shifted first, the low rumble in his chest deepening, his breath rising in small clouds that drifted sideways under the force of the wind. The boy tightened his grip beneath the officer's collar, forced numb legs to brace, and dragged him farther from the wreck, each step carving lines into the snow like small declarations of stubborn hope. Behind them, the twisted engine let out a strained metallic groan as if waking from a nightmare, and Samuel didn't need to be told what would happen once heat found the leaking fuel. There were seconds, minutes if mercy allowed, and he refused to let those minutes turn to ashes. Max pressed his flank against Ethan's chest, shielding him from the cold that clawed in from every direction. Frost clung to the dog's fur in silvered patches, but his stance never faltered, his body forming a barrier, his gaze sweeping the tree line with the discipline of a soldier who understood that stillness invited death. Samuel dropped to his knees beside them, breath shaking, cheeks raw from wind, and forced his fingers to move despite the numbness spreading across them like ice creeping along glass. Raymond had taught him that skills mattered most when fear was loudest. So he pulled a strip of fabric from Ethan's torn sleeve, wrapped it tight above the wound, and pressed down with trembling determination. The resin he had applied was holding, for now, but blood was persistent, and the storm would not forgive hesitation. The engine behind them gave a final metallic cough, a struggle, and then a spark snapped inside the wreck, a sound so small it barely stood out against the storm. But Samuel heard it. Children who grow up in mountains know the music of danger. They know when a sound means run, when a sound means hide, and when a sound means pray. His heart hammered a warning as he leaned forward, trying to judge the distance between them and the inevitable fire. Max barked once, a sharp, cutting command, as if urging the boy to move faster. Samuel wasn't done. With a quick motion, he grabbed his father's rescue watch, clicked open the metal back plate, and remembered Raymond's instruction. Listen. Always listen. Wounds aren't the only thing that can kill a man. Something inside the wreck, something deeper than the shredded seats and shattered glass, felt wrong. He didn't know how he knew. He simply did. Perhaps it was the way the cabin lights flickered with dying electrical pulses, or the unsettling quiet that followed the spark, or the strange angle of the rifle lying half hidden under collapsed airbags, as if someone had placed it there intentionally, not dropped it in the chaos of a crash. He crawled back toward the SUV, keeping low as the wind whipped shards of ice across his face. Max whined behind him, torn between guarding Ethan and following the boy, but Samuel waved him back. "Stay," he mouthed, not wasting breath on sound. Max obeyed, just barely, positioning himself over the officer like a shield of muscle and instinct. Inside the wreck, the air tasted like burnt metal and gasoline, a sharpness that made Samuel's eyes sting. The dashboard was crushed inward, the steering column bent, the gear shift frozen mid-motion. Snow drifted in through the shattered windows, settling on the seats like a thin shroud. The rifle, its barrel dented and stock cracked, lay at an unnatural angle, the chamber open as if waiting for someone to notice it. Samuel reached for it, fingers closing around cold metal, when something inside the empty casing glinted. A memory card. Small, black, intentionally hidden. It hadn't fallen there by accident. Someone had tucked it in place using the hollow of the rifle's chamber as a hiding place, so clever it nearly disappeared into the devastation. Samuel lifted it out carefully, holding it between shaking fingers, and felt a chill far deeper than the storm run along his spine. People didn't hide memory cards inside weapons unless they held something worth killing for. Outside, the engine gave a twisting roar as fire found fuel. Samuel stuffed the memory card into the inside pocket of his jacket, spun around, and scrambled back through the broken door just as flames burst beneath the hood, curling upward like a starving beast finding breath. The boy threw himself into the snow beside Max and Ethan, arms pulling, legs digging, dragging them farther from the wreck, until heat brushed his face and fire painted the trees in violent orange. Max nudged him, urging him onward as the flames consumed the wreck with crackling hunger. The snow began to melt in a ring around the blaze, creating pockets of steam that rose like ghosts before vanishing into the storm's white jaws. Samuel stopped only when he judged they were far enough, safe from the fire, but not from whatever else prowled the woods. He opened the pocket again, looked at the memory card, and swallowed hard. Ethan had not crashed. He had been hunted, ambushed, left to die. And someone had cared enough to hide the truth in the only place no one would think to check. Max suddenly snapped his head toward the ridge, ears forward, body rigid. Snow drifted in thicker sheets, and through it came the muffled sound of engines, multiple, growing louder, not fading. Samuel felt the vibration again through the ground, a slow, heavy rhythm like the heartbeat of something enormous moving closer. Whoever had attacked Ethan had realized their work wasn't finished. Far away, though not far enough, the storm lit up faintly with the red pulse of tail lights turning back toward the forest. The men behind the ambush were coming. Samuel clenched the memory card tight in his fist. Max stepped forward, stance sharp as a drawn blade. Ethan lay unconscious between them, breath shallow but steady. And the forest, full of secrets and snow and danger that moved without warning, seemed to close ranks around the three of them as if preparing for whatever came next. The storm no longer felt indifferent. It felt like it was watching. The storm pressed against the mountains like a living thing, dragging long white claws across the ridgeline until the valley vanished beneath a crushing curtain of snow. The world had narrowed to breath and instinct, and Samuel didn't stop to think about the danger humming beneath his boots or the cold that tried to slow his limbs. He only tightened his grip around Ethan's shoulders, one real hand, one wooden, and pulled inch by stubborn inch toward the dark shape he knew was waiting just ahead. Max moved beside him, fur stiff with frost, every muscle coiled as though he could feel the forest listening. The entrance appeared between two snow-choked cedars, a black wound in the hillside, framed by sagging beams and stone that sighed under the storm's weight. The abandoned miner's cave. Raymond had shown it to Samuel once, at the end of a long summer hike. His rough voice low and certain when he said, "When the mountains scream, this is where you go. Nothing follows you inside." Samuel didn't know if he believed that tonight, but belief wasn't what kept him moving. Fear was, and the memory of his father's steady hand was. Inside the cave, darkness folded around them like heavy cloth. Cold air pooled near the floor, but at least the wind could no longer tear at Ethan's body. Samuel lowered the unconscious officer onto a bed of rags and pine needles left behind decades ago, and Max pressed close, using his body heat to shield Ethan's side. The faint crackle of snow settling outside echoed through the stone walls, a reminder that time was slipping away faster than Samuel wanted to admit. He lit a fire the only way he knew how, with bark, a scrap of metal, and the trembling determination of a child who refused to lose someone else tonight. Sparks hesitated before becoming flame, but when the fire finally opened its narrow mouth of orange light, the warmth spread slowly across Ethan's pale face, revealing every hollowed line, every shiver in his breath. Samuel checked the resin patch he had applied earlier. It held, but barely. The bleeding had slowed, but not stopped. Outside, the storm roared, but inside the cave there was a hush, a heavy, listening hush, as if the stone itself was waiting to see whether the man would live long enough to matter. Miles away, the cabin creaked under the storm's assault. Raymond Cole stood before the frosted window, shoulders squared, breath leaving small circles of warmth on the glass. He'd felt something wrong long before the weather turned, a pressure along the spine that old soldiers never ignored. The storm could lie, but instinct could not. Then he saw it. A flicker, small, rhythmic, stubborn, cutting through the whiteout like the blink of a distant star. He leaned closer, wiping a sleeve across the fogged window. The light flashed again. The rescue watch. Samuel's watch. The same one Raymond had trusted him with only in the rarest emergencies. His jaw tightened. Without hesitation, he grabbed his coat, rifle, and gloves, things worn smooth by years of storms, and stepped into the blizzard, letting the cold bite him awake. Snow lashed his face like shards of glass, but he pushed forward, following the faint echo of the light he'd seen. Each step filled with a father's silent prayer and a soldier's instinct that this night would demand far more than courage. Back in the cave, the fire cast wavering gold across the walls. Samuel sat close to Ethan, palms hovering over the injured shoulder, checking for warmth, checking for movement, checking for any sign that the man wasn't drifting away. Ethan's breaths were shallow, ghost-thin, but present. Max stood guard at the entrance, his silhouette framed against the swirling white outside. He didn't bark. He didn't shift. He simply stared into the storm as if reading the direction of every flake, every gust, every intention. Samuel listened to the wind and tried to steady his own breathing. He didn't know how much time had passed. Minutes, hours, something in between. The fire crackled again. His watch ticked faintly. And through the noise of the storm, Samuel felt the ground tremble, just slightly, like a heartbeat beneath the earth. Max's ears snapped forward. The boy lifted his head. The wind shifted. And that's when Samuel heard it. Engines. Not the distant rumble of snowplows or lost travelers. These engines moved with intention. Slow, crawling, circling like predators. The sound pulsed in and out of the storm until the earth itself seemed to carry it. Max let out a low growl, stepping farther into the entrance, blocking Samuel and Ethan with his body. Snow blew past him, swirling like ghosts around his paws. Then, light. A pair of headlights cut through the curtain of snow, sweeping across the rocks outside the cave before disappearing again. They reappeared seconds later, closer. Samuel's breath caught. His fingers dug into the fabric of Ethan's jacket. There was no mistaking it. The men who had ambushed Ethan had followed the trail, and now they had found the cave. The headlights vanished behind a wall of wind, but the sound of engines kept crawling through the trees, low and deliberate, like wolves circling a den they already knew held something wounded. Snow rolled down the slope in heavy sheets as Samuel pressed closer to Ethan, one trembling hand braced on the man's chest, the other curled against his wooden arm. Max stiffened at the entrance, paws planted deep, ears angled forward in a line of tension so sharp the air around him seemed to hold its breath. From somewhere beyond the storm, branches cracked, clean, precise, the sound of boots compressing snow with purpose. Samuel felt the vibration before he saw the shadows shifting through the white. They followed the trail he and Max had left, step for step, breath for breath, closing the distance with a patience that told him they had all night and no fear of what waited inside this cave. The fire behind him guttered, its light quivering across the rock walls, as if it, too, understood danger had arrived with a face. Max growled, a deep rising thunder that came from the ribs, not the throat, and then, without hesitation, he launched himself into the storm. His body broke through the curtain of snow like a streak of living shadow, a German shepherd built for loyalty and protection, hurling his strength into the night in one desperate attempt to buy the boy behind him a few precious seconds of breath. Samuel reached after him, but the blizzard swallowed the dog whole. The footsteps outside scattered, startled for a moment, before reorganizing into harsher rhythms. Men shouted, their voices jagged with cold and anger, then muffled again as the wind shoved them against the rock walls. Samuel's heart slammed against his ribs. Ethan sagged forward, his breath barely brushing the boy's wrist, and for the first time, Samuel felt the true weight of the night pressing down, the weight of choosing who he could save and how long he could hold before the storm or the men took everything away. Another figure broke through the white. Samuel jerked back, but then the shape straightened, stepped into the thin firelight, and the boy's lungs finally remembered how to pull air. Raymond. His father came stumbling into the cave, snow pounding off his shoulders, breath torn from the cold and the panic he had carried across the valley. His coat hung open, frost glazing his beard, and the rifle strapped to his back clinked as he dropped to his knees beside Samuel. For a moment, just a single, fragile moment, there was no storm, no danger, no line of footprints outside. There was only a father pulling his son close, one hand on Samuel's neck, the other pressing against the back of his head with the kind of relief that cracked a man open from the inside. Samuel clung to him with his one small arm, his face buried in the familiar fabric of Raymond's coat. The boy didn't cry. He simply shook, silently, like someone who had held the world alone for far, too long, and could finally set it down. Then Raymond saw the man lying beside them. His breath hitched. His fingers froze on Samuel's shoulder. Ethan Ward. Older, paler, half-conscious and bleeding through hardened resin, but unmistakably the man who once dragged Raymond out of a collapsing building in Afghanistan, who held the line beside him during the worst firefight of their deployment, who vanished one winter night 3 years ago without sending a single word. Raymond's face twisted with something raw, something too complicated for the storm to name. Gratitude, loss, disbelief, and the sharp ache of knowing a debt he thought time had erased had just returned to ask for its due. He knelt beside Ethan, brushing frost from the man's cheek with hands that weren't steady, and Ethan's eyelids fluttered weakly at the familiarity of the touch. His lips formed a name he didn't manage to speak. Raymond swallowed hard, his voice breaking into the heavy air. "You found him," he whispered, not to Ethan, but to Samuel. Samuel nodded, pushing the watch up on his wrist, the metal face still flashing faint reflections of the fire. He reached into his jacket, fingers searching past torn fabric until he brought out the small metal object he had taken from the wreck. A spent rifle casing, emptied, hollowed, yet heavier than it should be. He placed it in his father's hand. Raymond frowned, feeling its unnatural weight. He twisted the casing, and a thin memory card slid out, catching the firelight in a razor line of silver. His breath left him in a slow, disbelieving exhale. Ethan had kept it hidden, safeguarded it, carried it even when he vanished from the force, carried it all the way into this blizzard to reach one person, the only person he could trust: Raymond. Outside, Max barked again, a sharp, painful sound, followed by a struggle in the snow. The echoes slammed against the stone walls, drawing Raymond's head toward the entrance. Samuel's hand tightened on his coat. Ethan stirred weakly, trying to lift his head, but the effort drained what little strength remained. The fire flickered once, wavering under a gust of wind that pushed deep into the cave. Samuel leaned closer to Ethan, pressing a hand against the man's chest, feeling the thin rise and fall of breath. Raymond closed his fingers around the memory card, jaw tightening with the realization that whatever Ethan had carried, whatever he had risked everything to protect, painted a target on all of them tonight. The wind fell still, too still. And then the sound came. Not just one set of footsteps, but many, crunching through the heavy snow in measured rhythm. Shadows crossed outside the entrance. The storm parted just enough to reveal the glint of metal, rifles lifted, flashlights cutting thin beams through the swirling white. The men who wanted Ethan dead had gathered, all of them, and they stood just inches from the cave. Snow surged past the cave mouth in a violent spiral, the kind of wind that didn't blow so much as it carved through the air, scattering the remains of Max's struggle across the rocks. Raymond pressed Samuel gently behind him, one arm braced against the wall, the other curled around the cold metal of his rifle as shadows moved outside. Slow, sliding, patient shapes belonging to men who believed they had already won. The storm dimmed its roar for a moment, as if holding the world still to watch what would surface from the dark. A flashlight beam split through the white and struck the stone a foot from Raymond's face. Voices followed, low, sharp, the cruel sort of confidence worn by men who didn't fear consequences. The closest stepped forward first, boots crunching snow in a steady cadence. He was tall, mid-40s, wrapped in a parka smeared with soot and pine resin, jaw set beneath a scruff of ice-stiffened beard. A jagged scar cut across his cheek, pulling one eye into a permanent squint. The gang leader, unknown by name but unmistakable in presence, moved with the posture of someone used to commanding others into darkness. Raymond flattened a palm against Samuel's chest, silently urging him back, then shifted his weight just enough to tuck himself partially behind a boulder. Old instincts rose effortlessly, sliding back into his muscles like long-lost bones. He picked up a loose stone and flicked it across the cave, letting it clatter into the far shadows. The men outside froze. One turned, another lifted his weapon. The leader hissed a command. The diversion lasted seconds, but seconds were enough. Raymond dashed to the opposite wall, positioning himself between jagged rocks that created narrow sightlines. Snow washed in behind the men as they pressed forward, and Raymond's breath came steady. Too steady for a man who'd spent years trying to forget what it felt like to prepare for a kill. But he wasn't preparing for a kill tonight. He was preparing for enough time. Samuel crouched beside Ethan, felt the shift in the storm and pulled the signal flare from Raymond's pack. The tube felt enormous in his small, cold hands, so bright, so loud, so dangerous if fired wrong. His wooden arm, stiff from the cold, knocked against a stone, and the sound rang sharp enough to make the closest man pivot. Raymond bit back a curse, but Samuel didn't freeze. He raised the flare toward the mouth of the cave, bracing it against his knee, and with one breath, a breath that carried every scrap of courage left in his trembling ribs, he pulled the cap. The flare cracked open with a shriek of red fire. The blast lit the cave in blood-colored light that poured across Ethan's pale face, across Raymond's stunned expression, across the snow where Max's paw prints still tracked the struggle. The flare shot skyward in a spiral of sparks, tearing through the storm clouds like a burning thread, hissing as it carved a red wound through the night. Outside, the men staggered back, swearing, blinded by the sudden light. The leader roared an order, charging into the cave entrance with a raised rifle. He never reached the boy. Max came out of the storm like a hammer of living fury. The shepherd slammed into the leader's side with all the force of momentum and muscle he had left, teeth sinking into the padded sleeve of the man's jacket and dragging him down into the snow. The leader's rifle fired once, the shot exploding into the tree line, but Max didn't release, not even as the man writhed, kicking, grabbing for the dog's collar with frantic, frozen hands. Raymond moved, using the chaos to send another stone flying across the clearing. Two attackers broke formation, turning toward the wrong sound. Raymond swung out from behind the boulder, leveled his rifle, and fired into the snow in front of them, sending up a blinding spray of ice. Not a kill shot, a warning, and a message. He wasn't alone. Behind him, Ethan stirred. A low breath escaped the injured man's lips as he blinked into the red haze of the dying flare. Pain carved furrows into his forehead, but something older, something trained, clicked into place behind his eyes. His fingers crawled toward the fallen handgun near the fire. They closed around the grip, and with a shake that cost the last of his strength, Ethan lifted the weapon. A single shot cracked. One attacker screamed, rifle flying from his hands as the bullet knocked his weapon aside. Another dove for cover, shouting that the cave was armed. Ethan sagged immediately, the weapon dropping from numb fingers. Samuel caught his shoulder, crying his name in a hoarse whisper, but the damage was done. The attackers scattered, chaotic, uncertain, fearing the precision of a shot they couldn't trace. Above them, the flare's distant glow finally touched the clouds, and somewhere deeply muffled by the storm, a sound answered. Rotors. Raymond's head snapped upward. He knew that sound in his bones, the heavy rhythmic chop of a rescue helicopter pushing through a blizzard with engines strained to their limit. The search team, drawn by the flare, by the desperate arc Samuel had torn through the freezing sky. The criminals heard it too. Panic sliced through their formation. They bolted toward the frozen river that wound between the pines, a shortcut, a gamble, a death trap disguised as shimmering glass. The leader, still wrestling with Max, tore himself loose and sprinted after them, one arm bleeding where the dog's teeth had torn fabric and skin. Raymond shouted for Max, voice ripping through the wind. Max broke off, panting, limping, but alive. The men fled onto the ice, boots striking a surface that groaned under their weight. Cracks spiderwebbed beneath their feet. One slipped. Another shouted for them to spread out. But the leader kept running, eyes narrowed, breath ragged, determined to outrun consequences one last time. He didn't. The ice splintered beneath him in a scream of brittle sound. He plunged through, torso first, then arms, then legs, disappearing into the black water before the others could turn. The cold stole his breath immediately. He thrashed, clawing for the ragged edge of ice, but his soaked gloves slipped over and over until Raymond reached the riverbank, rifle raised but refusing to shoot. "Hold still," he shouted. The river obeyed before the man did. The broken sheet of ice swung inward under the pressure of his elbow, pinning him half above the water, half beneath. The helicopter's spotlight swept across the slope, locking onto Raymond, then onto the flailing man. Rescue ropes dropped. Officers shouted. The leader's fight collapsed beneath the weight of cold and fear. They pulled him out alive. Justice, carried in on a beam of white light. Raymond exhaled, long, tight, exhausted, before spinning back toward the cave, just as Samuel's small body wavered. The boy's knees buckled, his face drained of color. The wooden arm hit the stone with a hollow crack. The storm breathed its final gust as Samuel collapsed. The hospital windows held the pale morning like a fragile promise. A thin wash of gold, fighting its way through the last shreds of winter clinging to the glass. Machines hummed softly, steady and warm, and the scent of antiseptic drifted through the halls in a rhythm almost gentle after the violence of the blizzard. Samuel stirred beneath a thick cotton blanket, eyelashes trembling before his eyes finally opened. For a moment, he didn't know where he was. Then he felt the familiar weight of a warm muzzle pressed softly against his ribs, and Max's slow tail thump told him everything he needed to know. The boy inhaled carefully, and the world slipped back into focus. He was alive. Max was here, and somewhere nearby, hope had found its way into the same room. Across from him, Ethan Ward lay in another bed, pale but unmistakably breathing with more steadiness than the night before. His shoulder was bandaged tight, and his left arm rested in a sling, but his eyes were open. Clearer now, softer somehow, as though waking from both a storm and a memory he had carried too long. When he noticed Samuel watching, he gave the smallest smile, crooked but genuine, the smile of a man who had walked the edge of death and managed to turn back. Raymond arrived moments later, snow still melting from the brim of his jacket, boots heavy from the long night. He rested a hand on Samuel's hair, his breath shaking just once before he steadied it. The kind of tremor a father only lets show when the danger has finally passed. Max shifted aside so Raymond could sit, though the dog refused to leave Samuel's side completely. One paw draped protectively over the blanket, as if guarding what mattered most. Later that afternoon, when Ethan's strength returned enough for him to sit upright, he asked for Samuel. The boy walked over, fingers brushing along Max's back, his rescue watch flashing a faint silver glint across the room. Ethan extended his uninjured hand, his voice cracked by exhaustion, yet threaded with something firm and unmistakably sincere. He told Samuel that courage like his was rare, rarer even among the men he had served with, and that the world was held together by the kindness of those who acted before fear could silence them. Raymond watched quietly, his expression unreadable at first, until Ethan asked the question he had been holding. He asked if Samuel would allow him to be his godfather, not instead of Raymond, never that, but as someone who wished to stand beside him, to guide him, to honor the boy who had saved his life with nothing more than bravery, instinct, and a heart too big for his age. Samuel's breath quivered, not from cold this time, but from something warmer, something he didn't yet have a name for. He nodded, and Max pressed his muzzle into both their hands, sealing the bond like a witness carved from loyalty itself. In the days that followed, the memory card Samuel had found, hidden inside the hollowed rifle casing, unraveled everything. Federal agents came and went, faces set with grim understanding as the evidence exposed a weapons smuggling network stretching from the northern border to several abandoned routes deep in Montana's wild ridgelines. Ethan, even while recovering, provided details only someone on the inside could know, and Raymond realized with a heaviness that bordered on relief that the promise he once made, the promise to protect his brother in arms, had finally been honored in full. 2 months passed before the mountains softened into spring. The ice loosened its grip on the valley, and the snowmelt carved silver threads through Aspen Hollow's fields. Children returned to school, the town reopened its small diner, and the world, in its own patient way, remembered how to exhale again. On a clear April afternoon, the people of the town gathered near the river bend to unveil a wooden sign carved by hand, the Aspen Hollow K-9 Rescue Station. 4 names were etched beneath it: Ethan Ward, Raymond Cole, Samuel Cole, and Max, a quartet bound not by blood alone, but by a night where courage refused to yield. Samuel stepped forward as the crowd fell quiet. His rescue watch, once too big, once too heavy, once too cold against his wrist, now caught the spring sunlight with a brilliance he had never noticed before. He lifted it toward the sky, letting its mirrored face scatter thin, dancing rays across the last patches of lingering snow. The light broke into fragments, drifting across the field like tiny stars returning home after being lost too long. And in that moment, Samuel understood what the storm had been trying to teach him all along: that even the smallest hands, shaking or steady, frightened or brave, could carry the light through the darkest winter and bring it safely home. Some stories don't end when the mission does. They stay with us in the quiet places, in the pause before dawn, in the soft echo of footsteps leaving a hospital room, in the way a dog lifts its head when the world grows uncertain. And maybe that's where their true weight lies, not in the storm they survived, but in the gentleness that followed. Because loyalty, real loyalty, doesn't shout. It stands beside you when the wind is sharp and the path disappears. Courage, too, isn't always loud. Sometimes it's held in small hands, trembling but determined, choosing light over fear without needing an audience. And kindness? Well, kindness is the oldest kind of rescue there is. It doesn't make headlines, but it changes the temperature of a room, the fate of a night, the direction of a life. Tonight, as this story closes and the mountains grow quiet again, may we remember the ones who move through this world softly. The protectors, the wanderers, the children who refuse to give up, the dogs who never look away, and the men and women who carry their courage like a lantern in the dark. Sometimes the quietest hearts carry the loudest courage, and sometimes that's enough to guide all of us home.